Ok. Bene, eccoci.
Welcome back. It's today's last session. We still have a demanding agenda in front of us. And that's the reason why I would like to ask you, I already said that before, but for those who've just joined, please stick to your speaking time. It's 15 minutes each. I'll show you a gesture with my hand 10 minutes after you started, and then when the time is about to finish, then I'll let you know. So let's start straight away with the first pair, Maria Benedetta Curi, lecturer at the Sophia University Institute. She's got a bachelor's degree in philosophy at the University of Pisa. And she's currently doing a PhD in philosophy at the Sophia University Institute with a dissertation about thinking of unity and Hämmerle. And then we have Professor Edi Natuli. After their classical studies, she graduated in philosophy at the University of Florence with work on the philosophy of Hegel. And she also has a degree in dramatic theology at the Theological Faculty of Central Italy. And she's now doing a doctorate in Trinitarian ontology in the Faculty of Philosophy in Perugia. And they'll be talking about Hämmerle and Zambrano, a look through in the spiel of philosophy and music. Thank you very much for your presentation and especially for inviting me to present this project that is taking shape and that we hope that between May and June that will be taking on this project. Eddie and I met at the Sophia University Institute thanks to a doctoral research on the figure of Madeleine Delbrel. And at this institute, I'm in charge of a number of philosophy courses together with Professor Therese Anderson, which due to a series of circumstances, she's we wish to participate with two fundamental authors and some main reasons to the very title of the contribution highlights, as well as the first voice in the field. We'll see some glimpses and theoretical outlooks that we are gradually collecting, and Edison will talk about a workshop that she is conducting with Zambrana. And with talking about a figure of Zambrana, one of these workshops will be followed by Professor Schlobitten and Marta Michelaggi. By so doing, in the spiel, in the play between the theoretical and practical dimension that characterizes the methodology of the project, in the threefold
per ripensare l'estetica, quale dimensione terza.
Methods will be talking about the formal. We'll be talking about encounter dynamization and mediation between theory and ethics. When in thinking about art and through art and artists, we can also rediscover the art of thinking beautifully. It will also perhaps be possible to experience how much the aesthetic dimension is questioning and decisive in the final instance, precisely for that thinking about the being named ontology in the modern era, which all the more so today seeks a way, as new as its original form, of looking from within the happening of events and no longer from the outside as simple objects. An initial outlook, just to give some initial openings that will have then to be explored and taken forward in the project to come, is offered to us by the expression philosophy and musica, which takes us back to ancient Greece, to when Socrates, Plato's Socrates, in the Phaedon speaks of his recurrent dream, in which, now in one form or another, the daimon invited him to make music. O Socrates, compose and perform music. And what I did, what I believe, and what I was doing in the previous time, I believe that it was precisely these that the dream urged me and invited me to do. Like those who inside, those who are running. And so also the dream ordered me to do what I was doing, that is to make music, as if the philosophy were there I am music, and I was doing just that.
Il filosofare sembra allora nascere in
Philosophy then seems to be born in close connection with musica, which on the one hand highlights the importance of the relationship with the arts, the muses that sing, speak, and dance, and on the other, and in depth, tells us that the logos and its philosophizing, that is the dialectical and dialogical guarding of the light of being, is exercised in a thinking on the entities, the being, which is recognizable as a musical cosmology that is able to listen and therefore to contemplate the rhythm, the light, and the sound of those stars that are the first principles that draw the harmonic cosmos of the universe. Between philosophy and music, that is to say, art and the arts, there thus seems to be a play of the reciprocal inherence that already leads one to read in that end as a conjunction. Also, one is, that is to say, philosophy is musica. And more, philosophy happens as musica. In order to try and see together how this plays, the reciprocal inherence takes place in a look that gradually invites us to enter, to pass through, and thus experience what we're talking about, the term Spiel in the title of our contribution offers itself to aims at continuing the journey with further brief steps and glances. Let's now turn to the present day with a German author, native of Freiburg in Brisgau, a philosopher, theologian, artist, painter, and pianist, a priest who died in 1994 when he had been Bishop of Aachen for almost 20 years. I'm talking about Klaus Emmerle, who in his Thesen zu einer trinkarischen Ontologie, a short text composed of 33 theses written as a rather original letter of greetings for Balthasar's 70th birthday. In thesis, 25% of this term set the question of a Trinitarian ontology. Why is there play and not non-play? Spiel or nicht Spiel, would Shakespeare say? Why do we play it? Why can't we do without playing? And yet we're placed in a state of freedom with regard to the play and in the play. Spiel, sometimes spielen as a noun verb, means, like in English, play to play, both playing a play and interpreting a work of art. So that in Thesis 22, Hemmerle describes it through the performance of a piece by Mozart. And I quote, "In musical performance, I welcome myself anew, and what is played becomes new in its performance. That is, for example, the tension of all artistic interpretation. I only play Mozart well when Mozart remains Mozart. But if I play completely well, Mozart becomes more Mozart and I become more me. In the same year, Hammerle himself published a text that collected the lectures he gave in the winter semester of 1974-75 when he had just succeeded his teacher Bernard Welte in the chair of philosophy of the Christian religion in Freiburg, in which, in order to explain the Trinity to his students, starting from the fundamental plays that characterize human existence, Hammerle came to speak of the Trinitarian Urspiel as the original Trinitarian play, and he says, "Your divine play that is God is this and nothing else. It is Father, Son, and Spirit relating to each other, giving to each other, and playing with each other, spielen. And they are the reality of the reciprocity of giving themselves, nothing else beyond, before, outside, or after their mutual giving." All this just 1 year after the publication of another text entirely dedicated to Spiel, volume 1 of the Theodrama by Balthasar of 1973. Intense and decisive years in which there seems to be a real spiel in between the two authors, between content and form, attested also by the correspondence started between them in 1972, and that will end shortly before the death of the theologian from Lucerne in 1988. In the opening pages of the volume, Balthasar writes in a manner almost difficult to distinguish from Hammerle's that, and I quote, "God has now forever incorporated the drama of existence of the theater of the world into his very own play that he would like and wants to play on our stage as well, where we act. A play in the play, our play plays in his play." While we have seen how for Hammerle the musique that will express the Trinitarian Spiel is the music, a musical performance, well known also to Balthasar because he too is a pianist, the latter puts the Spielen into action through the comparison of theater. And I quote, "In the theater, a kind of transcendence is attempted in which men could both see and judge their own truth. By virtue of the metamorphosis, the dialectic of the mask as veil and revelation, through which they could find a purity in their own regard. Here in the comparison, a door can be opened to the truth of revelation." Also significant is the where the play of human existence and the play of God come to get intertwined with each other, both for Hammerle and for Balthasar, in the cry of Jesus on the cross, a privileged place capable of initiating and capturing in unity between earth and heaven the rhythm of the Trinitarian Spiel in which we're called to participate. Balthasar writes, "On this cry falls from the silent horizon the flash of an action full of decision in the turning point from Good Friday to Easter. The horizon responds as an event, insofar as the answer is transcendent and insofar as it responds to this singular interrogative. Christ's synthesis of all questions, it is pronounced once and for all, Ephapax. It is therefore no longer surmountable either before or after in some other play, but substantiates every play, giving it its horizon." Continuing this musical spiel, also in the philosophical sphere, it is possible to meet other interlocutors, for example, Martin Heidegger, Franz Rosenzweig, the former whom Hammerle listened to several times in Freiburg following his teacher Welte, who was his pupil, whose attempt to refound metaphysics in a fundamental ontology can be reread in the key of the Zuspiel. He writes, in fact, in Beiträge zur Philosophie that the event of the truth of being must be transferred from the first beginning to the other, so that in the Zuspiel, a very different song of being resounds. Then in Holzwege, he entrusts the play of being in which every player is called upon to enter into poetry. An art capable of recognizing and speaking almost in a prophetic way, first from the abyss. In The Origin of the Work of Art, which is always present in Holzweg, Heidegger describes this ontological play of reciprocal interrelationship that animates artistic work according to a triadic dynamic. And I quote, artists and work are what they are in themselves and in their reciprocal relations on the basis of a third thing, which is in fact the first, namely in virtue of that from which both the artist and the work of art derive their very name, in virtue of art. Then Franz Rosenzweig, whom Pemmerle knew very well through the mediation of Bernhard Casper, friend and colleague, who was also pupil of Deltas, and who, at the conclusion of the third part of the Star of Redemption, he dedicates a section to the Spiel of the people, Volksspiel, going a step further than Heidegger. Rosenzweig, in fact, proposes as a musique capable of proposes dance as a musique capable of unifying God, man, word, electing is an art of redemption. The art form in which poetry rises from the ideal world of representation and enters the real world of representation is dance, and all that evolves from it. Because in the dance, the poetic word, even if it is dialect, is realized in the simplest of gestures, the gaze. There, where in the dancing gaze between individuals, it is possible to experience the gaze of God. Looking out from here into the modern era, we can continue this spiel by involving other authors who have made it the key to their philosophizing. Just think of Kant and his Critique of Judgment, where the passage to a broad thinking is possible, where the spiel sometimes is playing and dancing, and it's a form of beauty. The same spiel is taken up again in those years by Schiller in his letters on the aesthetic education of man, in which he reads that of all the states of man, only play from which beauty is born as the reciprocal action of two opposing instincts and the union of two opposing principles is what makes him complete, developing his dual nature in unity. From the modern era, a last glimpse, trying to reconstruct the origin of the word spiel, takes us back again to the first centuries of Christian thought, when in the period of Althochdeutsch, the official German used between the middle of the 8th and the middle of the 11th centuries, this term was written only with a short I, that is to say, without the prolongative E, that is spielen, S-P-I-L-E-N, translating the movement of the dance, with which the fathers of the church began to describe the Trinitarian mystery through the verb and the noun perichorein, perichoresis, composed of peri and choreo, which means dancing around or dancing in circle, embraced. The term was taken from the description of a concrete activity, the way of dancing not only of the Greeks, but also of the Middle Easterners. And I'll end this first moment by concluding the discussion about Spielen using the words of Klaus Hemmerle pronounced during a lecture he gave in 1991, which became part in which our thinking artist speaks of perichoresis in this way. Perichoresis is originally the name of a dance. One dances around the other dances around the first, and so everything flows between them. Everything unfolds in these axial play, axialen Umspielen. As long as we do not accept this love that makes us dance and take each other seriously, a great school of dance still has to be attended to the end. So in Spiel that we just outlined of philosophy and musique, through these arts and artists of thought, I invite Eddie to start and with to talk about Zambrano to continue this choreography. Thank you. We still have 10 minutes. And well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today with you. And thank you for the words of Professor Maria Benedetta Puri, because through her words, she already introduced what I'm going to talk about in my speech. Philosophy and Music, as we've already heard from Professor Puri, is the title of a course, or perhaps it is better to say of a school of aesthetics that develops around various aspects which see philosophy intertwined with painting and sculpture and music and dance and literature. And literature, that's the topic I'll be talking about. And from these main aspects will be developed through a theoretical and practical phase, because the aim of this school is to bring beauty closer and to experience it for all those who wish to do so, which is why the aesthetics course will be open to anyone who wants to have this journey with us, this experience. As Pope Francis reminds us in number 235 of Laudato Si, beauty, which in the East is one of the names most frequently used to express divine harmony and the model of transfigured humanity, is everywhere. It is displayed everywhere in the forms of time, sounds, and colors, lights, and scents. It is this everywhere that will guide my reflection, an adverb that goes beyond the merely spatial and takes on a metaphysical dimension. Wherever there are traces of beauty, philosophy can and must be challenged by them. The consequence is to renounce capturing and manipulating look that that wants to know how we can come to know the origin and the end of all things. And so, a look capable of welcoming reality as an epiphanic place comes forward, a reality that gives itself to us in its complexity and in its being in tension. But how then can we not think of the symbol? Because it is in the symbol that the tension of opposites is maintained, a tension that is what gives that dimension of between. A philosophy of the between is a philosophy that cannot have a center. It cannot be centripetal, which is why the figure of the ellipse can help us. That is that geometric place of points that doesn't develop around the center, but from the relationship of 2 points that are distinct and distant from each other, and just because of that, but they are in reciprocal tension, just because of that, they give rise to this geometric figure of the ellipse. And truth is given in this tension, not in a unidirectional and objective knowledge, but in this tension that is a relation, and that, because it's a relation, turns into an encounter. Truth is not given in totalitarian forms of knowledge, therefore, but in this encounter, it can happen in this encounter that is the main challenge that philosophy of the between raises without falling into the pitfalls of logicism and irrationalism, and in order to make room for life. It is therefore necessary to rediscover philosophy as a lifestyle, as a modus vivendi, trying to understand that the theoretical flaws, gaps, and aporias are often such because anachronistic and systematizing hermeneutic has been imposed on the texts. In Jung's Red Book, we find, and I quote, "This meaning of things is the higher sense which is not found in things themselves, nor in the soul. It is rather God who stands between things and the soul. He is the mediator of life, the way, the bridge, the passage." Jung's words introduce us even better into these between thought, which speaks of a life at the intersection of heaven and earth, solitude and communion, finite and infinite, standing on the threshold. How can we not think of Popper's philosopher, the philosopher of the threshold, Popper? And it is to stand in the tension of this image of the eclipse I was talking about before. What has just been said can be found in Maria Zambrano's reflections, of which we give a few brief remarks here. The choice of this Spanish philosopher allows us to return to what we said at the beginning about the encounter between philosophy and the arts, philosophia and musiche. In her, in fact, the language of philosophy meets the language of poetry, and philosophical reflections become a life experience. And if philosophy is a modus vivendi, a looking between or through, then Zambrano is a philosopher in her own right. She goes through life experiencing it, starting with a gaze that de-subjectifies, forcing the subject not to make themselves the focus of everything. In order to better explain what has been said, we can use the German language, which uses Erlebnis to refer to the experience of the subject, but also Erfahrung, whose root Fahr refers to the concept of passage, of crossing, and indicates an experience where the subject loses its fixity as an absolute initial point and is opened by what, transcending it, leads it into the crossing that it is our own existence, our own life. Among the many experiences, the crossings of the real that Maria Zambrano undertook, let's take as an example her experience of exile, which lasted for 40 years during the Spanish dictatorship of Francisco Franco. In The Philosopher, this exile soon lost its purely historical connotation and it acquired a metaphysical and mystical one. In fact, exile proves to be a universal condition, whereby every man is a nomad on his earth who wanders having lost his or her place of origin. The exile upsets the nomos of the city in which he establishes in which the temporary city is established. And the exiled person therefore undermines his or her absoluteness, and through the reference to a lost homeland. That of the exile is a life that he or she experiences, which, as we said earlier, crosses places without belonging to any of them, because the exile recognizes his own or her own place as not corresponding to the revelation of the destination. Exile is also a metaphor for living between two shores. It means living between what's finite or infinite, remembering, however, that we're not in the presence of a split or of a dichotomous reality, but rather within a tension in which the two poles and their relationship, we open up to a triadic dimension. And why not a trinitarian dimension? The Spanish philosopher denounces, in fact, a philosophy that, by pursuing truth with reason, has often affected a divorce between life and thought, whereas philosophical research must enter with wonder into the entrañas, the bowels of life. The aim of philosophy, therefore, can only be to produce a thought that passes through or is passed through by reality. Zambrano calls this way of philosophizing the exercise of poetic reason, which almost oxymoronically indicates both that poetry cannot be confined to the irrational and that reason cannot only be the calculated reason of science or that of a systematic philosophy, such as that of Kant or Hegel. It's a poetical reason that doesn't allow itself to be consoled by the reasons given by reason, but without renouncing reason, this poetical reason welcomes the feeling through a gaze that opens up to wonder and disenchantment. The two terms, disenchantment and wonder, only apparently eliminate each other, because in Zambrano's work, the gaze of wonder before reality doesn't sugarcoat reality with its painful third. Therefore, although disenchanted, the philosopher preserves her wonder at reality. Her revolt is thus taking place starting from the assumption of the existence of shadow of gray zones in reality, of the unknowability, or to quote Dostoevsky, of the existence of an underground. That is, her philosophy seeks to approach the being without raping it, and her thought is presented not as an analysis that that turns into fragments, nor as a synthesis that makes reality fit together in a forced way, but rather as a patient looking. It is fidelity to life that prevents the construction of philosophical systems or absolute worlds. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you both for this wonderful speech. You explained each other, and later on we'll have more time and we'll continue during the debate. And today we have three pairs of presenters. And now I would like to introduce Oreste Tolone, with a PhD in anthropology and with a PhD in humanistic studies. Is a researcher, senior researchers are TDB in moral philosophy at the University G. D'Annunzio of Chieti, Pescara. And he'll be talking together with Ruta Giugnaiti. She studied art critics and also she has a degree in pedagogical studies. And at our faculty, she studied history of cultural heritage at the Gregorian University. And she felt the similarities between the experience of the painting according to Danama and the experience of the Ignatian prayer. And now she's doing her PhD at the Gregorian University together with me, the new dignity of the churches. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Oreste Tolone. He's starting. Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you. And thank to all the participants for these very busy days that gave us food for thought, and the interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary approach can open many doors. I hope I'll be able to leave a door ajar. The one about Dante and Guardini. And I'll try to be quick, both for me and for you due to the time, but I'll be talking about the main topics. Dante is the author to whom Guardini has probably paid the greatest and most constant attention throughout his life. He wrote many essays and held dozens of university courses. And he's an author that has been studying the most. This attention that he paid to Dante is a way of it reflects an attention to the Mediterranean thought, and reflects Guardini's attention that is directed towards literature. When official truth seem insufficient to deal with the transformation, the becoming of reality. And Guardini sees in Dante a person that is in his same situation. So he needs to understand which vision needs to draw from in a moment where the modern society is entering a critical period. So there's attention to an important figure, but then attention also to literature as an integral part of literature, but also of an era. So the crisis between, but it's also a focus on an era, the one between the end of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Guardini also pays attention to Michelangelo, and Donna translated his texts, and he's also translated Giordano Bruno's Eroici Furori. So it's the focus to an era where the look of the man on the world is changing. So we move from a look based on theory and a metaphor that Grunenberg defines as a change of metaphor, where the gaze is dominated by the being and sees reality from the perspective of the whole. And we move to a moment where the eye of the man becomes the eye of the modern man, so scientific revolution, and that resists the construction of reality. So there's a transition, there's of a metaphor where an old approach is not possible anymore. So the Platonic or non-Platonic glance of the icon that attracts man. And there's now a gaze where the man founds his truth. So this is a crucial moment. And in this period, well, the term landscape originated, and the landscape philosophy originated here and is connected to the ascent of the windy mount of Petrarca, who on Good Friday, Easter Friday, ascended the mountain like Dante did. Dante ascended the mount to have a Weltanschauung, to see everything, to have a view of the totality. Petrarca ascended few years later, another mount that refers him to a wide range of landscapes, and that is directing him to the subject. The Divine Comedy is therefore the story of Dante's eye, a story of how the world changes with the change of his gaze. So we could say that there are three anthropologies and three worlds that follow each other in this long wandering of Dante. And the world that he's observing around him is the world that he himself has created, starting from the dark woods of the subject, and around him there are dark woods. So it's a harsh landscape with many obstacles, the one described in the Divine Comedy. For example, in the characters of the Inferno that he comes across. For example, the simoniacs are upside down, they cannot see. Magicians and soothsayers who want to anticipate the future, well, their eyes are turning back, and also thieves have tremendous and appalling looks that close worlds rather than opening them up, and that take place in enclosed places, but also the purgatory, that is the space of the openness of human beings, where the indeed damned are placed. Well, then there's a reflection of Guardini on the non vedere, invidiare, to envy, to not see, so not, to not be able to enjoy the world around you and wanting to change it. This could be considered as a sight condition. The man is not able to impose himself on the same wavelength of reality. And Dante tries to remedy metaphysical separation that already took place in the ancient world, and which is not possible in Petrarca. So the problem is, so who's helping Dante to leave these dark woods? Well, he's being helped by guides, by the people he comes across. Let's take a step back. When Guardini attempts to perform these hermeneutics, turning to Rilke and Dante, does so because he's offered the chair of a christliche Weltanschauung, so a Christian world vision. And before accepting, he meets Scheler, who's one of the founders of anthropological philosophy, wrote Die Stellung des Menschen im Kosmos, so the stance of the man in the cosmos in those years, where he was highlighting two concepts of a biologist in the distinction of Welt and Umwelt, that is to say, world and environment, or surrounding, the surrounding world, that of animals. And man is in this situation. So man has the ability to turn his gaze to capture the world. So the reality in its global vision, or in order to multiply his Umwelten, his surroundings, that is changing surroundings based on the fears, on the interests, of egoisms, selfishness, or the culture. He's a spokesman of to create a protection mechanism that cannot be surpassed. So we can look with the same eyes and we can find Umwelten or Welten, so worlds. So when we talk about Weltanschauung, it's important to underline the Anschauung, the vision, the view, but it's also important to highlight the Welt, the world, the fact that we aspire to having a view of the totality. In our contemporary world, this hope, the aspiration to reach a global overview, that for Guardini is the world seen through Christ's eyes, because total vision will only be achieved when the man is able to see the whole. So in the contemporary world of science, where the world and the universe have become endless, the ability to have a vision or a Greifende that holds everything together is complicated and is an action performed by metaphysics or religion or an artistic dimension. Nevertheless, Guardini walks down this path because vision, this vision, and then I'm going to conclude. Even though I have plenty of things to say, but basically, it's important to understand whether we're talking about a nostalgia, a melancholy of the world that we find in Guardini's philosophy, in the face of the impossibility to leave this sense of the whole of the ancient world. But there's also an epistemological, methodological element, which is quite interesting, that already emerged today. So the vision, the sight, the view, well, in my references, I talk about the La Nobiltà della Vista, a very interesting work. So the gaze, the sight, as meant by Guardini, includes these distantiating element and an element of totality. Dante's gaze and Guardini's gaze can be placed along this line. Well, they are gazes of those who, in the polarity of life, in a polar position, do not want to exacerbate this opposition, but they want to grasp the different in the same. In the Gegensatz, Guardini says we can either highlight the differences in the world of life, or we can acknowledge that spirit and body are not separated. Body is spirit too, and vice versa. The man is nature, and nature is man. The inside is the outside, and the other way around. So the surface is not something superficial, but it can be depth too. That's why when Dante encounters or comes across people, they want to communicate, because communication always takes place. Even the damned cannot help, apart from Lucifer in the very center of the hell. So the main idea is that there is a gaze, which is a typically Mediterranean and artistic gaze, which is a genial one, and that can move constantly from view of the object of science in the foreground. I can't set off my alarm clock. Just a second. I can't switch it off. So in the relation with reality, science and the philosophy of concepts concentrate on the object, on the entity, on what science elevated to one knowledge, and that's also okay, but there's another ability, the fact of being able to see the object in the background, to see the fragment in the whole. And this gaze is the artist's gaze. Also in a functional way, we could say that it's the gaze of human sciences, the ability of the philosopher, of the artist, of the poet, of the dancer. You were talking about Hemele, who was a pupil of, who's a person I studied also during my study years. So the science puts its entities in the foreground, but the overview, where I locate the study of the entity, is provided by a global view. The global view is given to us by Christ in Guardini, but that of the philosopher, of the artist, also from an epistemological and heuristic point of view, is useful and functional because it serves to guide and position the study of the fragment within an all that I take for granted as in a landscape. The landscape philosophy is a philosophy where I put an entity, an object, a part like a house in a landscape that seems to be almost endless. It's providing this overview, this global view. It's an insight. It doesn't come from philosophy or nor from science, but it originates from a thought from Dante, for example, that can be integrated and then from a philosophical point of view can lead to an ethos of oscillation. And I derive this expression from Guardini. So the ethos of oscillation doesn't mean that we only have to focus on the entity of science, nor on the ground or the totality that man cannot achieve unless he resorts to Christ's eyes, but it's the ethos of oscillation where I recover the depth of the entity by looking at the background and the size of the entity of the background looking at the entity. This is interdisciplinarity, so combining disciplines, focusing on the background with the hard sciences. So Guardini positions himself on the line of Damaso, Edgar Morin, for example, who talk about the need of a close communication between disciplinary worlds that are very far from each other. And I'm giving the floor to Ruta, who will be talking about Rilke too. Good evening. I'm going to talk English.
I'm very pleasant to be invited by Professor Yvonne Donash-Lobbitten, who guided me in my studies of the cultural heritage of Church at Pontifical Gregorian University, and who is guiding in a PhD thesis through the thinking of Romano Guardini. My PhD thesis, The New Dignity of Disused Churches, a counter to the throwaway culture, wants to understand the undefined space of decommissioned churches in the cultural heritage of church and to find their Christian form. The writings of Guardini on the masterpiece contribute with the method of a cross-disciplinarity to the nowadays researches, which helps to find out the reality of God in the unresolving problems of the postmodern culture. Professor Oreste Ottolone underlines this potentiality in the introduction of the work of Dante, quote, "While this work of redefining supreme realities and ultimate meanings is a factor of chaos, it can also become a source of creativity. Reconstructing by interpreting, this is therefore the fundamental task. Guardini sets himself, reworking a new image of the world, overcoming the relative shows of postmodernism by means of so-called artistic thought, that is one that goes beyond abstract and universal apprehension and has a profound proximity to life. The current era, with its vision, ends up dangerously endorsing the divinization of nature and the autonomy of the subject, separating man from his original foundation. This is why the great constructions of world literature can help man to organize the world on a new basis, to observe it from an alternative point of view. End quote. In the introduction of the book Rainer Maria Rilke's Interpretation of Existence, Guardini says, quote, "The same man who is able to say such significant things about the modern age at its end is also looking towards the future age and announcing what is to come," end quote. In my thesis, I'm trying to find how the space described in the poetry could become a methodology to define the space of decommissioned churches. So Guardini books on Rilke becomes, for my research, precisely the bridge between Guardini's Catholic worldview and the problem of the decommissioned churches in the 21st century. The challenge in defining the sacred space in the decommissioned churches lies between its consideration only as the content, space, or only as the form, church building, and the contradiction of the two poles of the sacred and of the profane. So the absence of the contrarieties do not permit to find the Christian form, as well as in the Duino elegies of Rilke. I believe that Romano Guardini's comments on the poetry could be understood as a discernment of the space in all disciplines, not only in the cultural heritage of the church. Exactly in this interaction between the different disciplines, in this case, the literature and the architecture, it is possible to experiment how the method of the polar opposition of Guardini works in the cross-disciplinarity. In his book, Guardini notes that while the Duino elegies attends primarily to the aesthetic dimension, it lacks the sense of Christian revelation and the character of truth. These critiques were radical and aimed not to reconstruct the scientific literary or the scientific cultural context, but rather to find the context of meaning among the works of Rilke. Guardini tries to find the Christian form, which is more than the Christian content. For this reason, Guardini search, quote, not whether Rilke's promises are personally credible in him, but whether the statements are in themselves right, whether everything he says about life and death, about the human person and man's relationships to man, really hits the mark, end quote. Guardini reflects not only on the poetry, but as well on the poet. To sum up, Guardini claims that, quote, as for the content of the elegies themselves, Rilke clearly expressed the claim to have expressed something new and profound, a metaphysical, or more precisely, a religious message, which requires carefully exegesis, end quote. The poetry of Duino elegies focus on the struggle in the space of being, in the compassionate love in the open, or the poor space. All the Duino elegies are one narration of human being who is more and more isolating himself from life, what is opposite to Dante, who is opening step by step to the world. The first words in the elegies were born from the mental state of oppressive lowliness, indeed of abandonment, and as it is happened to the space of the decommissioned churches. Rilke writes, quote,
Uta, please, a bit slowly. Okay.
See, Rilke writes, quote, who of the angelic host would hear me, even if I cried out, end quote. It seems that the author cries to be heard, but the angels do not hear him. They are indifferent, not in communion. The role of the angel in the elegies is not as that of the biblical angels, the messenger from the heaven, but as being not interested in life on earth, which means in its own cosmos, remains in its cosmos. When Guardini comments the phrase of Rilke, quote, cast the emptiness from your arms into the space that we breathe, end quote, underlines how the emptiness creates the intimacy of what is in front of us. The first mention of the space of church is identified with the voice of God. According to Guardini, this passing brief is full of the mystery, is recognized but does not have form, is calling for being. Moreover, the silence is heard in the church through the quiet voice of the deceased youths as a singular and subjective experience. Rilke asks, quote, "A rustling comes to you now from those who died young. Did not their fate speak quietly to you whether you entered in churches in Rome and in Naples?" End quote. Guardini explains that in the elegies do not exist any human relation, but the world is like the expelled emptiness of the persons into the space of the world. In the end of the comment of the first elegy, Guardini explains that the emptiness of space made the human being terrified, and the interiorization of the sentiment made a terrified space. It seems that the product of interiorization of the fear suggests both the recognition of the secularized society and its resecularization progress in action in even the postmodern society. The human being is blocked in its own sound and cannot hear otherness. For Rilke, this does not exist in the juxtaposition between outside and inside, but they are united in the interiority. Furthermore, the interiorized space becomes existence in its essence, so the space is considered above the time. Furthermore, in the eighth elegy, something harmful happens to the human being in that his eyes, his main point of access, become blocked. Quote, "With all its eyes, the animal sees openness. Our eyes alone are as if reversed and set all around it like traps, surrounding its unhindered departure." End quote. This openness is the poor space. According to Hans Urs Balthasar, the poor space is not the space of the transcendence of God, but the space of the interiority of world. Meanwhile, according to Guardini, the poor space is the place, non-place, where there is not any separation, the state of being in which the totality is experienced, where space and time do not exist. One does not distinguish between the life and the death, the space of secular salvation. Guardini explains that this space is not of a human dimension because it is not physical, not spiritual, but a place where everything is one. In this unity, everything is saved to the fullness of deep being. The ninth elegy reveals the essence of the process of the interiorization of the world. Quote, "Perhaps we are here to say house, bridge, fountain, gateway, jug, fruit tree, window, at the most pillar, spire, but to say them, you understand. Oh, to say them in such a way as even the things themselves never dared to imagine to be." End quote. The inspiration for Rilke comes from the creation of God as the first space and the creation of the believers as the second one in the first one. But when both are taken away from the Christianity, it remains only the exteriority, the myth, without the sense of interiority. In particular, Rainer Maria Rilke emptied the sense of God in the literature, even if he used the spiritual terms, mythologized them, and maintained only the aesthetics without its meaning. In other words, belief was substituted by interiorization, in which the human being was fulfilled by the invisible being of the things. In the 10th elegy, the empty space of the church is more underlined, reinforcing the impression of the emptiness in the sense of meaning and its consequences or effects to the human being. In spite of its superficial clearness, the church is closed as a post office on Sunday, and it is disappointing. Quote, how completely an angel would crush their market of consolation, which the church enjoys, both ready-made, cleaned up, closed, and frustrate like a post office on Sunday, end quote. Guardini comments it.
Uta, io devo ancora un minuto.
Okay. It seems to both the ready-made, what is revealed through it has not emerged from experience, but has been constructed and paid for the basis of prefabricated scheme. This image of space of church is the double inconsolable because of you cannot enter to the church, but even if you enter, you will find the emptiness without the service. In conclusion, according to Guardini's description of the Duino Elegies, the work seems to present as a fusion of the space of being without the synthesis of the tension. The spaces of the wall of everything are recognized in the definition of Rilke pure space, in which remains only the knowledge of the experience of space, but does not contain the knowledge of the theory of space and what is in between them. The knowledge of contemplation is impossible without both members of the truthfulness of the look. Rilke creates his theory based on the experience. I believe this kind of theory is created as well for the space of the decommissioned churches could be changed with the artistic thinking in the sense of Guardini. Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie mille.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, this speech was not translated. And now we'll move on because I'm afraid that the university is going to close. I asked them how long we can stay on, but let's listen to the last two speeches, the last pair we have. We have Garlaschelli, Enrico Garlaschelli. He's a professor of pedagogy at the Higher Institute of Religious Sciences in Milan and professor of philosophical anthropology and theory of interpretation at the Higher Institute of Religious Sciences in Mantua. And his main field is hermeneutic and its different applications. Ildebrando Bruno Volpi achieved his master's degree in religious studies in He achieved his master's degree in religious studies in the High Institute of Religious Sciences of Mantua, and in the same institute, a degree in philosophical anthropology and philosophy of interpretation, and is currently taking care of the publication of a book. Please stick to your speaking time. And you have 30 minutes. And if I'm not mistaken, there's going to be a dialogue between the two of you, right? Yes, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Hildebrando, I see that he's there. He was a former student of mine, and then he became my colleague. He's helping me at the Higher Institute of Religious Sciences in Mantua. We have no problem as to duration. We do not want to bore you with a long speech, and we already delivered it to Yvonne Dona, who's a friend and a colleague, and whom I would like to thank for starting this lively debate. I feel really at home. And the previous speakers, I think they're in line with what we are going to say and what we are going to talk about. I think that it's more important to talk about that and to start a dialogue with each other. And then you will also have the chance to look at the paper I wrote so that you can have a wider overview. As Yvonne Donna said, well, my formation is the phenomenological and hermeneutic. So I'll try to convince you about the inspiration that Romano Guardini drew from the phenomenological and hermeneutic perspective. So I'll be comparing Guardini to some authors of the phenomenological tradition. Heidegger will also be mentioned. Well, it's always dangerous to talk about Heidegger, and every time I quote him, I always feel that there's something off. And then I'll also be talking about referring to Palkovich, who's the one of who's perfectly knows Guardini. So, well, I'm going to quote Vita e Pensiero from the Catholic University, where we talk about an unexpressed dialogue between Guardini and Heidegger. And she says something that needs to be the center of what we need to discuss. And she talks about a letter that Guardini sent to Heidegger, and she says about the phenomenology of an idea. I collected material, and I came to it when I realized that the concept of conscience is the manifold one. So I'd like to say and explain what the mysterious spirit of Catholicism is, and I think that all the speeches I've been listening to, they follow this line. That is, when they talk about a gaze, then is going upwards, as Oreste Tolone said, the professor that preceded me. This gaze doesn't have to be a superficial one, or it doesn't have to create a distance that has no connection with reality. So this is probably the topic that makes philosophers be suspicious when we enclose it in closed concepts. And Heidegger sometimes says, using an oxymoron, they become unreflected concepts. And how can concepts be reflected? Because they do not draw from experience any longer. So when we talk about experience from a phenomenological point of view, we always turn to the word of life, the topic of pure experience.
Parlare lentamente. Parlare lentamente.
Please speak slowly. Otherwise, translation won't be possible. And so I always think about these similarities. So now, any time that Guardini is referring to this relation, then I would like to share a PowerPoint with you, but I'm afraid that I may lose some time, so probably it's better I just read it out.
Puoi entrare.
Yes, please. You can share your screen and your PowerPoint presentation if you want. Otherwise, Anna, could you please display his PowerPoint right now? Oh, well, otherwise I can just quote it. Do not worry. I can just quote it with no reference to my PowerPoint presentation. Hildebrando has the text in front of his eyes.
Anna non ce l'ha il PowerPoint.
No, Anna has no PowerPoint because you didn't send it to her. So I'll tell you the different quotes so that these similarities are going to emerge, for example, the topic of the concrete living by Guardina when he talks about the gaze and their relation that originates in the act of seeing. He says the thing and the eye, the figure and its understanding that form one of the original relations in which existence is found. And this comes from die Sinne und die religiöse Erkenntnis. So whenever I hear they're talking about these regional relations, and later on we can also mention another quotation, the living I-you relationship, where I see an interesting correlation that, according to Husserl's, are part of so-called Lebenswelt, so the living world, the world of pure experience, according to Husserl. And Husserl, and I quote him here, has the word of pure experience, it precedes all sciences of the higher sense, without which no unitary object could appear, and so in general, the unity of a nature of a word as a passive synthetic unit could not be constituted. So here we see a perspective that from the ideal, so a concept that is closed by itself, so we move to something practical, and it highlights what I call the aesthetic dimension, and especially we can speak of the transcendental aesthetics. So, for example, when we read what Guardini means by blick, by gaze, then there we always have to make reference to these transcendental aesthetics. That is to say, the task we have to bring out an a priori that structures the intuitive world. And I can also quote Heidegger once again, Husserl, when he talks about the antepredicative, that concerns the possibility of retreating to an earlier layer of meaning, the so-called Rückfrage, which doesn't mean distancing oneself. It's not taking a distance. I'd like to quote here author that is dear to me, Derrida, when he talks about Levinas, and he talks about these distancing. But even when we're talking about distancing, we still have to talk about hospitality, because intentionality is hospitality. So this living world, this Lebenswelt, we have to go back to that has a general structure despite its relativity, and this general structure, which everything relative is linked, is not relative by itself. So it's becoming with some sort of invariance. And my speech also starts from another reference work, because when we talk about the Lebenswelt, then we always have to think that it can be considered as a place of education with a high educational value. So, for example, some pedagogists, and this is probably the most original side of the matter, well, some pedagogists, they created a phenomenological pedagogy here in Italy, and they talk about the Lebenswelt as the place of education. And I would like to quote an extract of the pedagogist Vanaiori, who says, the giving of an educational event is constituted by the Erlebnis, the lived experience, which allows us to see education in its essence with immediacy, in the experience emerging from the concreteness of existence, and interhuman, subjective, and shareable knowledge opens up, starting from the fundamental elements of body, time, and space experience. The Leibniz, so the subjectively lived experience is mine, but it is also open and in continuous relation to the living and communicable with anyone else who shares with me the common existence in the same world of us all. The Lebenswelt of Husserl is the world of the original evidence of the world of life, to which the theme of intersubjectivity, communication, education, and relationship can be traced. So we need to go back to an experiential relation that is expressed by our own experiences. Now, I would like to explain you why I asked Ildebrando Bruno Volpi to engage in this dialogue, because talking about the glance that tries to catch a glimpse of the essence of things. Guardini says that these intuition, the essence, this insight of the essence. Well, I talked to my colleague Ildebrando Bruno Volpi, and he opened up a way because he found a very important similarity. We know that phenomenology is not a philosophy by itself, but it's an attitude. We're talking about the phenomenological attitude, and beyond the different philosophies representing different Weltanschauungen, we can find in Husserl, Heidegger, and in Guardini certain phenomenological attitude or perspective, a phenomenological approach. I wanted to suggest, so I wanted to present this insight. We created a book. Well, we found a diary of a priest, Don Primo Mazzolari. It's a diary, it's a book. And now, maybe we could read just a small page. And before me, we already said how literature can fulfill a more effective role and why Guardini prefers literature. So, Derrida, when he says, I find in literature what I'm looking for in philosophy, I completely agree with this approach. And if we read, Solari was an expert of French literature, so wasn't a phenomenologist and neither a philosopher. But I don't know, maybe since the time is running out, I don't know if Ildebrando wants to step in. And he would like to present the two examples we wanted to introduce to you. Well, yes, I'm going to read a page from the book of Don Primo that he wrote at the beginning of the 40s, a diary of a spring. He says, things that we see from the heart are different. I see with the heart. It's not the widespread abandonment of a sunless sky and clear enough to give me back the glance that he has on everything. It's an interior growth, a new dimension of fullness and mercy that makes me feel the fragility, the sweet fragility of spring. I fall in love with things that are passing by. I think that fraternity is feeding on these mysterious things, and yet true and good. If we feel too strong, then we cannot love. And a mom attaches to her child this way, and she sees in her child tenderness. The highest and truest meaning of love, of truth is love. This is my own translation. Well, it's important to say that Don Primo, wrote this book, Diario di una Primavera, Diary of Spring, between the autumn of 1944 and the spring of 1945, when Don Primo is living in clandestinity, closed in a room of his parish church, and who's been looked by the enemy. And he's apparently secluded from the world. And this priest shows how it's possible to participate in human experiences through a glance that is not distracted by too formal sounding words, a glance that can give us the depth of our lost humanity. Well, Primo Mazzolari had a phenomenological attitude, we could say. If we read these words, well, you didn't print out these words, unfortunately, but when Don Primo Mazzolari talks about becoming, and this is against common sense because we're always looking for certainty, we're always looking for a point of reference. And Professor Natali said that too, the term of the topic of nomadism and of exile. Enrico, since the text doesn't match what you say, you need to speak slower, and it's really difficult otherwise. Okay. All right, I'll try to slow down. Well, Don Primo Mazzolari says at a given moment, well, I'm not going to read the text because it's rather long and we need to summarize it, and I'll try to speak slowly. And as I said, it's a glance that Primo Mazzolari has on the becoming of things. And it's a gaze that loves changing things. Husserl is immersed in the becoming, because it's in the becoming where we have to find the variance. So we do not have to create a dominating thought, but we need the variance to emerge from the becoming itself. So we do not have to close off all possibilities. Before we were talking about the encounter with things, and only by respecting the becoming we can do that. So we are really able to do things through experience, experiri, which means a crossing, that is the experience of something that is something else, something that you are crossing. So these encounter with the other, and Jacques Derrida says, well, you cannot even have a profile, otherwise this is the other, and this experience of the other can only be found in the becoming, in the process of becoming. This process of becoming is igniting this relation, and it's a relation of humanity, of agape, that we find in the relation between a mother and a child. And it's an experience of the limit, of the boundary. And I think that all the polar position theory formulated by Guardini is an experience of the limit, of the boundary. When Guardini talks about form, well, he's still talking about a limit of the form, of the shape. He talks about exceeding the limits. And when you compare these phenomenological attitude to Guardini's thought, well, we thought it would be useful to comment an extract, a text, Maybe we can read it out and then we can comment it, and we can leave room to debate. Yes. Shall I read it? Yes, please read it. We chose this text by Guardini, and in this text we say, I wish I could open new eyes to see things in a new way, to make everybody aware of the creative force that is present inside of them, and not the discredit of obedience. So not showing, but helping to see in a new way. So imagine just a painting in the room with an opaque looking. Is it possible through a chemical analysis to see what these colors are, or if it's the work of art of a great master? But it's also possible to open a window on the part in front of it, and the room will be flooded with light, and colors will be appearing in their full brightness. Then at that moment, we won't have to prove anything, because you'll be able to see it. You can see it. Well, this is my own translation, of course. And in this text, we see the emergence of this phenomenological attitude. So Guardini says that we can have a concrete gaze, so that, as Mauro Ponti says, we can learn to see the world through a thought which is not flying over, literally, other things. So if we read this text, then we can find a very important sentence that has already been said before too. So at a given time, you don't have to prove anything, because you can see it. And this statement, well, I'm sorry, Brando, we organized the whole thing, so it's going to be a dialogue, but due to time constraints, well, we had to change it. And Husserl also says, writes, we are logical, but we do not know it. And Husserl says, least intellectual possible, but the most intuition should be used. And this goes back to the discourse of the mysticists, when they describe an intellectual dimension that is not knowledge deriving from the intellect. The ability is to we have to let the eye see, and this is a reference to what Guardini wants to say when he talks about the gaze. We needed to move from the seeing to the beholding. And Guardini is talking about an insight or an intuition that is not a perception. It's not something deriving from our senses, but it's something of a real nature. And he quotes Husserl, who called it a vision of an essence or intuition. Don Primo From his window, well, he was catching a glimpse of the surrounding reality, and he catches a glimpse of the fragmentary reality, and he focuses his gaze on what's essential. Yes, that's exactly the same thing. So he turns into the gaze of the heart, which does not describe reality, but seems to be connected with a specific seeing. Yes, exactly. Right. So I don't know if we still have a couple of minutes left, and otherwise I would dwell on the notion of aesthetic. No, unfortunately, we do not have time, but thank you very much. It was really interesting. Thank you very much to all of you, to all the different pairs. They all start from the same authors, Husserl, Heidegger, and they have different views. So this is our question for the last minutes. And it has to do with service learning. Well, I didn't do that only for you to be bored. Well, it's different fields that are closely intertwined. It's not that philosophy explaining service learning, and service learning is the practice of what philosophy states. No. So our question should be this: why, what we've been listening at the beginnings of these part about pedagogy, and we've been talking about our philosophy, pedagogy, but my question is, where is the connecting element? Where is the element that combines everything? This should be the question we should devote our attention to, as well as other questions we may have, of course. But so we are looking for a connection here, or maybe there is no connection, who knows, right? Who would like to say something? Who's got questions or remarks? Or do you think that we are talking about different worlds? Are we talking about different visions, or is there a connecting element between the different parts we've been talking about today? Different sessions. Well, if nobody wants to say anything, then I would like to say what follows. I think there are some keywords that are coming back, the encounter, the between. These are words that we've come across in all the different talks. I don't think that there was no speech where these three words were mentioned. Well, I'm going to mention these three words, but there are probably other words too. And now I'll give the floor to Jaya. Jaya? Yes, I perfectly agree. I think that the connecting element here is the method, the way, the ability we have to move to curiosity, the desire for encounter, the desire to start a relationship. And that's something that we've found everywhere, both in pedagogy. So there is a movement to a desire for encounter, also in philosophy, and everything arises from a question. And it comes back as a question too, probably, because it's an ongoing series of questions with no answers, or questions leading to answers, or leading to other questions, and so on. And then I also have a question, which just came to my mind later, but talking about service learning, I saw, compared to what we did yesterday, to comparing what we did yesterday with today, was we've been talking about beauty and ugliness, and there are encounters that can originate both from ugliness and from beauty. And this produces anyway something. So, well, my question is for those who are in charge with service learning. So my question is this: can we achieve better pedagogy when the encounter starts from ugliness or from beauty? Or is it the same thing? Or what we derive, is it the same? I don't know if I made myself clear. I'll give the floor to Karina, who's been talking about this topic, and Professor Aldi said that too, when she said beauty everywhere. Well, I don't know if we are going to be able to say something meaningful at this time, but what Pope Francis says is, he talks about head, but the head includes the eyes and ears. So the gaze and the hearing, so the sight and the hearing. But for learning to be possible, we need to have openness. With no openness, there is no learning. And that's the reason why we need to have something that is actually surprising us, that is that will open your gaze. And Pope Francis talks about hearing the cry. And this could be, for example, the result of amazement, beauty, or maybe it could also be the wound or ugliness that is the main element. So I think that both can lead to learning. As far as I am concerned, I don't know if you can hear me okay. As far as I am concerned, I've been talking about the underground. Dostoevsky was also talking about that. And we could also say that he's talking about ugliness, but actually it's another aspect, because I don't like talking about beauty or ugliness, because I don't like dichotomies. I don't like separations like this, because they just break up the thought, and only an analytical thought can grasp the complexity in the world, reality. Man can grasp everything. All signs are complex and difficult to understand. So if we want to use these contradiction between beauty and ugliness, I think that both beauty and ugliness can be an epiphany of something. Well, Dostoevsky is talking about the underground. And it's a short story about a peasant. And in this short story, it's almost a diary. This man is he's sweating, he's dirty, his hands are full of dirt, and this child, that is Dostoevsky as a child, well, he runs away. There's a child that runs away, and this peasant welcomes it, takes him in, and reassures him, and he performs the sign of the cross on his forehead. And then when he's then he's sent to Siberia, because the death penalty is turned into forced labor, and the other inmates look like beasts to him, because they beat each other up and they're drinking. And so this child, now an adult, sees the Marai peasant behind all that ugliness. So we can say that behind each one of us, there's an ontological image of God, that even when we lose these resemblance, that With God, we are not able to affect it. Well, you cannot affect the ontological image. It cannot be affected. Can I say something? I don't know if you can hear me. We've been talking about Kant before and the criticism of judgment. I don't know if it's the English title. And there they're talking about beauty and ugliness and about the feeling of wonder. But couldn't we be talking about the sublime? Because probably the sublime is a better fitting term for what we're saying here today. And especially so we can solve these apparently irresolvable dichotomy between ugliness and beauty, because probably in the sublime could be a better term. Well, I'm surprised that Professor Donna didn't jump in with his proposal about the use of the sublime. Maria Benedetta. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I was really interesting. Everything was really amazing. I tried to connect the dots. I feel there's something that is actually unifying everything. And we are called to have new eyes or we are talking about a common line that is involving theory and practice and combining them. So I think that much service learning is going to emerge from all of these, and also our project is the result of meetings like this one. And with regards to beauty and ugliness, something came to my mind before we were talking about piety or mercy. And the philosopher talks about the fulfillment of the pulchrum, that is canonized, and the pulchrum is represented by Mary under the cross. The Marianum is the fulfillment of the pulchrum. It's Mary at the feet of the cross, and it's a new generativity. As a waste, as a barren land, Mary is like a barren land regenerating her son. So it's a challenge of thinking together in Christ's gaze lies in managing to see the beauty in everything, in the cross, in the cry, but also for the cry to be the cry of the delivery of a child. And I would also like to thank you because there are so many common resonances that I derive from this meeting, and I hope I can keep in contact with each one of you. And now, Emanuele, well, it's really late, I know, but please go ahead. Okay, so I'll be quick. I'd like to make reference to the last comment while you were talking about beauty that is showing, is being shown everywhere. So I thought, I was wondering, I was thinking about the last ones, the poor of the earth. Where is beauty there when we talk about the neediest? And then when you talk about this kind of look, well, we do not see them, but we see Christ. So beauty, the beauty lies in fact of going beyond this ugliness. So, when we see the poor ones, we see them pulling Christ, the cross of Christ. So this is just a remark. Yes, thank you, thank you. I don't know whether Ruta, please go ahead, and then we'll see. Thank you very much. Very shortly.
nostri incontri di questa settimana, quando è stato anche parlato, no,
In this week, we also been talking about psychotherapy, and we were talking also about the Laudato Si and about the term care. What we are doing is this. Today, we are recreating. This is something that is what we're doing today resonates with me and makes me think about the term care.
Nella società, no, learning serving che è un po' non è più focalizzato su una persona, ma un po'
In
più
society,
largo,
encounter
è una grande responsabilità, si amplia il nostro
is not focused on one person, but is a shared thing. We are widening our gaze, and today we've been clarifying these. So I think that we are referring to the structure of what we've been talking on the first day. And well, I really needed to conclude now because we ran out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you all. And I hope we will have more time to, unfortunately, we didn't have probably enough time to debate. And I think it's really been an event. So I'll see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Rome time. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to listen to all the speakers, and sorry for the late hour. And thank you very much indeed, and see you soon.
Per aver organizzato tutto questo.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for organizing everything. Well, we've done it together. Thank you to all the speakers. I learned very much. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Arrivederci, grazie.
Grazie.